is there any difference between junub bathing and the Jumu'ah bathing? Yes, there is. So Jarkuwa is asking about performing ghusl on Friday versus performing ghusl whenever the person is experiencing a major impurity. And the major impurity is the result of having sexual contact or sexual discharge even without sexual contact, or in the case of a woman, her period is over. So before being able to pray, she must perform ghusl in order to lift the major impurity. A man and a woman who experience wet dreams or sexual discharge due to any reason or sexual contact, they cannot recite Quran, they cannot sit or enter the masjid, they cannot pray until they lift the major impurity with performing ghusl or ghusl al-janaba, bathing to remove the major impurity. While performing ghusl on Friday, if it was not due to lifting a major impurity, as mentioned earlier, and it is simply to perform ghusl because it is recommended to bath on Friday before going to the masjid, then that is called mustahab, recommended, versus the first type is mandatory. Another major difference between the mandatory ghusl to lift the major impurity and the recommended bathing or ghusl, such as on Fridays, on the day of Arafah, upon entering Mecca and before performing ihram, etc., that if a person is performing ghusl in order to remove the major impurity, then this ghusl is sufficient to lift both the major and the minor impurity. In other words, after ghusl, you can just go ahead and pray. I didn't do wudu. Well, the ghusl, which is covering the entire body with water, washing the entire body from head to toe, have left the major impurity. So accordingly, it also left the minor impurity, even though the person didn't actually make wudu. But the ghusl, al-wajib, is sufficient for both, according to the more right view. While ghusl, which is recommended, such as ghusl on Friday, on the day of Arafah, or the Eid day, it isn't sufficient to perform ghusl and bath and step out and say Allahu Akbar. In this case, you must perform wudu and observe the order. فاغسلوا بوجوهكم وأيديكم إلى المرافق وامسحوا برؤوسكم وأرجلكم إلى الكعبين. Ayah number 6, chapter number 5, Surah Al-Ma'idah. Why? Because الترتيب في الوضوء فرض. Keeping the order of observing ablution is mandatory. So if you wash the feet before wiping over the head, it's not valid. It doesn't count. If you wash the hands, the arms, before washing the face, that doesn't count. The wudu is invalid. It's fard, mandatory to keep the order. So in the recommended ghusl, you just showered and washed your body. You didn't intend to perform wudu. So you're going to say, well, it is the same in the case of the mandatory ghusl to lift the major impurity. Correct, except for the fact that in the case of major impurity, this ghusl would lift it. So it would lift anything lesser than that accordingly.